Hello everybody, my name is J.D. Lawson and I am the Shooting Sports Director at Sequoia Council's Camp Davy Crockett. And today I'd like to share with you a little bit about firearm safety and just some general information about firearms. And specifically I'll be working from the Shotgun Shooting Merit Badge book. Okay, and we'll be covering some of the requirements out of those, but we probably won't hit the whole thing because it is a very comprehensive merit badge. But first of all, to start off with safety, the first thing we always teach, no matter if we're teaching the merit badge or if we're just got a troop at camp shooting for the weekend, are what we call the 3 always rules. And these are rules that it doesn't matter what else is going on. If you follow these rules, there's going to be nobody harmed by the use of that firearm. Okay, and that's what we're going for. We want to make sure that everybody knows how to use a firearm safely. Okay, so the first of the always rules is always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Now, if we're at camp, our safe directions are either pointed up into the air or down range. But this one's sort of a no-brainer. If you've got the gun pointed somewhere that is not towards another human being, even if that gun accidentally goes off, nobody's going to get shot. At worst, you're out whatever the price of the ammunition you're using is. And the other thing I forgot to say about the 3 always rules is these hold true across any firearm that you're using, whether it's a shotgun, a rifle, a pistol, if you're using a bow and arrow. Doesn't matter. As long as you've got that firearm or bow pointed in a safe direction, you've taken a good first step towards being safe. Okay? The second of the 3 always rules is always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, which can be sort of confusing because that brings into the question of when are you ready to shoot. The big thing I would say there is, if you're carrying a firearm, you're not, lined up, ready to use it, whether you're aiming it or pointing it in the case of a shotgun. You want to make sure your finger is not inside the trigger guard where the trigger itself is until you are absolutely sure you want that gun to fire. Once you're at that point, of course, you're going to want to put your finger on the trigger and go from there. And that brings up our third always rule, which is always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it, which again brings into the question of what constitutes ready to use it. Now, if you're target shooting or shooting at camp, odds are you're not going to load that gun until you've got your target set up, everything's ready to go. If you're at camp, we hand you your ammo, and then at that point, you're ready to load it, or in the case of shotgun, we load it for you. We load it for you, you load your gun, and then you use it. If you're hunting, that's a little bit of a different story, because obviously if you're hunting, you don't want to wait till you're at the point where you see the animal that it is you're hunting and then load your gun. That's a little bit too late because, sometimes you have very few moments to take that shot if you're hunting. So you want to maximize that time. But at the same time, you don't want to load that gun in the morning before you leave your house and then carry it with you in your car or whatever to the point or to the place where you're hunting. So that's not when you're ready to use it. So what we always recommend with hunting is you get to the place where you are hunting, you're ready to go out and look for these animals or sit and wait for these animals. That's when you load your gun. That way you're not traveling in a vehicle with it loaded, but you're not waiting to the last minute either. So that's what we mean when we say keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. So again, just a real quick recap, your 3 always rules. Always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. You follow those 3 rules and you're good to go. Okay? You've got a good start on being safe with a firearm. Okay? So I'm going to open the book here, and the next 2 requirements that it talks about in here, all of these requirements, by the way, come from requirement number 1 The one that we just went over is requirements. I just lied to you, and I apologize. That one came from requirement 2. And if you're following along in the merit badge book, requirement 2 has 2 different options. Option A, which is shotgun shooting, and option B, which is muzzle loading shotgun shooting. I'm going to be going over requirement A because here at the house and even at camp, I don't have a muzzle loading shotgun. So hard to do that one without the stuff necessary. But the requirement that I just went over is requirement 2B. Identify and demonstrate the rules for safely handling a shotgun. Okay, so we're going to go back and hit requirement 1, which also has some safety stuff on it. Requirement 1A and 1B. A says, explain why BB and pellet air guns must always be treated with the same respect as firearms. And then B says, describe how you would react if a friend visiting your home asked to see your or your family's firearms. So I'll talk about the BB and pellet guns first. That one's pretty straightforward because it's in the name. BB gun, pellet gun. Those should be treated with the same respect as other firearms because they are still firearms. They're guns. They can still cause harm, they can still cause injury, and in some cases they can even still cause death. BB guns are very dangerous because a lot of times people don't use those same basic rules that we just talked about, those 3 always rules. You should use those with any firearm you have, and that includes BB guns and pellet guns. So be sure that, if you have a BB gun, you've got a pellet gun, whatever, don't shoot that at other people. Pellet guns, especially some of the higher dollar ones, some of the Olympic quality ones, they'll actually, over a short distance, shoot their pellet at close to the same velocity as a .22 rifle. So, if you're in front of one of those things and it goes off, it's going to cause some damage. And BB guns are the same way. They can still hurt and kill you, even though a lot of times people treat them as just play toys. They aren't that. They can still cause some serious damage. And then requirement B says, how would you react if a friend asked to see you or your family's firearms? The obvious answer there, and the one that we normally get when we're teaching this class, is everybody just says, tell them no. And that certainly is an option. There's nothing wrong with saying, no, I'm not comfortable with you seeing these firearms, anything like that. However, that's not your only option. If a friend asks to see you or your family's firearms, if you will go get an adult, your parents, grandparents, whatever, then there's nothing wrong with that person looking at that firearm in a controlled, level-headed situation. Now, I will say, to go along with that, not only should you get your parents' permission, but you should also get your friends' parents' permission, because there are people that don't want their kids to be around firearms, and just because that friend of yours is curious, their parents may not want them to be around those firearms. So be conscious of that. Make sure you have permission from both sets of parents or guardians, and that it is supervised by an adult. And after that, there's nothing wrong with somebody, admiring a family's firearm. So, that's certainly in the realm of possibility there. All right, requirement 1C says explain the need for of eye and hearing protection. So we'll start off first with why you would need to use eye and hearing protection, and those are both pretty straightforward. Hearing protection a little more so than eye protection, probably in the logic sense. Guns are loud, and especially even with the quieter ones, a lot of times you'll hear people say that they went shooting 22s, and because they're so quiet, they didn't wear hearing protection. And then, 20 or 30 years down the road, you hear them yelling what after you talk all the time because they can't hear you. Okay? So, the first line of defense there, obviously, is some kind of hearing protection, whether it's ear plugs or ear muffs, something of that effect. You'll definitely want to have either one or the other of those on while you're shooting. And then, in the worst case scenario, if you don't have hearing ear muffs or ear plugs, you've got this set that you've been given right here. You can plug your ears fairly efficiently with those. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, on top of the noise factor that you hear there, guns, when they're fired, have an amount of pressure that's built up. And when that pressure releases, it sends, sort of a shock wave out. Now, that shock wave from a bullet is generally going to be fairly small. But if you've ever watched Mythbusters, that's one of the things that they love to show in slow motion, is that shock wave going out from an explosion. That bullet does the same thing. And most of the time, that shock wave is going to be fairly close to your face or your ears, just because of the way guns are made and you hold them. It's going to be close to that same vicinity. That hearing protection also does a pretty efficient job of protecting you from that shock wave, and protects your hearing from that as well. And then as far as types of hearing protection, we talked about that already. Ear muffs, ear plugs, and in the worst case scenario, you've got your hands that you can use to protect your ears. That brings us to eye protection, and there's several different types of eye protection that are out there. Some is more effective than others. We use just standard glasses, safety glasses at camp when we shoot. You're certainly more than welcome to use goggles as well. That's an option. If even just a normal pair of glasses does what it needs to do as far as keeping your face protected. Now, why would we need to keep your eyes protected? Well, same as we talked about with that shock wave. When you fire a gun, whether it's a rifle, shotgun, pistol, doesn't matter. There's little bits of gunpowder that get left behind, as well as little bits of lead. Well, when you open that gun up, that air pulls that gunpowder and lead out, puts it in the air, and its number one favorite place to go is into your eyes. So that's the first reason you need to wear eye protection. It stops those small particles, the lead and the gunpowder, from getting in your eyes. Secondly, with that, when you open that firearm up, whether it's a pump action or a bolt action or a semi-auto or a brake action, and we'll talk about the different action types here in a minute, it's going to eject that shell, and you don't want that shell to go in your eyes or your ear, even though that's sort of less of a concern than the eye as far as it going in it. You don't want that to hit either of those. You also want to make sure, especially if you're shooting a rifle that's going to send out a really hot round, spent casing, whatever you want to call it, that you wear tight clothing, that shell, when it gets ejected, isn't going to hit and go down in your clothing and burn you somewhere on your body, because that's definitely a concern depending on what you're shooting or what type of firearm you're shooting. So keep that in mind as far as safety is concerned. Okay. Moving on, the next thing that it talks about is personal hygiene, or one of the next things that it talks about is personal hygiene, and that's requirement 1G. And you'll notice I skipped some requirements there. Those requirements that I skipped, I'm not able to do those online, because it talks about hunting and the laws for owning and using guns in your area, and that obviously is different from one area to the next. So that's something you'll have to work on your own, research that. Depending on where you're at, your state's game and fish organization. I know, with this being Sequoia Council in Virginia, that's the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. And then in Tennessee, that would be the TWRA, Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. So those are your options in those two states. Outside of that, every state has one of those. I'm not sure what their names are outside of those two. But you can go in there and look that up and get hunting regulations for your area, as well as your gun ownership laws. So definitely check those out. Be aware of those if you're planning on buying a firearm or anything like that. There are some basic ones that I might be able to go over in a different video later. But like I said, they're going to change from one area to the next. So definitely look those up on your own. I would definitely encourage that. But jumping back in, requirement 1G, explain to your counselor the proper hygienic guidelines used in shooting. So personal hygiene, we always make this joke. Why does brushing your teeth matter for shooting? Well, brushing your teeth really doesn't. Although, if you've got stuff building up on your teeth, then there's nobody going to want to be around you, so there's that. But when it talks about personal hygiene, what it's talking about goes back to that gunpowder and lead. I was talking about how that, every time you open that action up, it releases gunpowder and lead out into the air. Well, it doesn't just have the ability to get on your face, it's also going to get on your hands, it's going to get on your clothes. So you've got to take care of that, because if you don't, let's say you go shooting, you don't wash your hands and then you go eat, all that gunpowder and lead that's on your hands is then going to get on your food, and then you're going to ingest it. And over time, that's going to build up, and it causes a lot of nerve issues. Gunpowder and lead are both nerve agents, or have the potential to be. So it creates an issue over time where you may not be able to control some of your muscles, and obviously we don't want that. So if you go out, you go shooting, make sure you wash your hands with cold, soapy water. And it's important that it is cold, soapy water. What cold water allows you to do, and you've probably heard this in school, is all these pores that are on your skin, if you put them in cold water, they'll close up. So you don't have to worry about washing gunpowder and lead into your pores. Whereas if you use hot water, it opens those pores up, and that's going to wash that gunpowder and lead down in your pores, where you might sweat it back out later, or it gets directly into your nervous system. So we don't want that to happen. So cold, soapy water. One of the questions that we get very oftentimes when we go over this is, can we use hand sanitizer? And the answer there, unfortunately, is no. Hand sanitizer is not going to clean the gunpowder and lead off of your hands. It's going to make sure that the gunpowder and lead that you ingest doesn't have any germs on it, but we're not worried about the germs on them. So make sure it's cold, soapy water. Also, with that hand sanitizer, some of them open pores up, so that creates that issue as well. So you definitely want to make sure that you're aware of that you wash your hands with cold, soapy water. I will say, if you're taking the muzzle loading option, whether it's rifle or shotgun, not only do you want to make sure that you wash your hands and stuff like that, but muzzle loading tends to make an even bigger type of a mess with the gunpowder and lead. It's going to create more of that all over you. So not only are you going to want to wash your hands, but with muzzle loading, it's not going to hurt if you wash your clothes as well. Bath as soon as you can, because that stuff will get everywhere. And I've got some friends that can tell you from personal experience, if you spend all day shooting, muzzle loading anything, in this case it was muzzle loading rifle, and then go try to get on an airplane, you will spend 4 or 5 hours talking with some very nice TSA agents about why their bomb-sniffing dogs alerted to you, even if you've washed your hands and not your clothes. So that was definitely an interesting situation. So keep that in mind if you're planning on doing any shooting, and then you're going to try to travel, especially by airplane. Those dogs definitely know what they're doing. So make sure that you've washed your clothes, you've washed your hands, and you don't have any of that smell left on you, which can be hard to do sometimes. But keep that in mind. The next one is 1H, identify and explain shotgun sports. So the 3 big shotgun sports are trap, skeet, and sporting clays. All 3 are, often considered to be skeet shooting by just people talking, because you're shooting at what are called skeets, the round clay pigeons. And here at my house, I don't have any right now, and obviously can't go to Walmart and buy any. So, for right now, I don't have one of those to show, but they tend to be orange, and those are actually called clay pigeons, is the proper term for them instead of skeet. But a lot of times, you tell somebody you're going to go shoot skeet, and they just automatically assume that you're shooting those orange clay pigeons, and they're not aware that it's an actual sport and that there's a different ways to shoot them. So anybody that's ever shot at camp or is familiar with how we shoot at camp, what we shoot there is considered trap. You've got one thrower, it sits in one spot, and it's going to throw to the same place pretty much every time. And you're standing in one spot at camp shooting. So that's trap. You've got a stationary or a set throwing area. It throws it to the same place pretty much every time. Then we get skeet. Skeet is the same general idea, except skeet is going to come from various directions. Some of them can come from side to side, or from the other side back across. Some can come sort of towards you. Some go away from you. Some go high. Some go low. And you don't know where it's coming from necessarily when you yell pull. Okay, so that's skeet. There's a difference in trap and skeet. And then finally is sporting clays. Sporting clays is sort of like a trail that's set up, and you come to a station, and when you're at that station, there's going to be one thrower. It's going to throw more or less the same way every time, but you don't know what that one way is. From one station to the next, it could be different. And there you get what people call rabbits, where they can roll along the ground, which is kind of interesting. So that's sporting clays. Those are your three big shotgun sports. And then the next part of that says identify where you can shoot these sports or partake in these sports. And most of that is normally going to be ran through various rod and gun clubs or shooting clubs that are in the area. That's going to be your number one place for that to happen. Some ROTC groups may do that, but they're more into the pellet rifle thing and archery for the most part. There's not a lot of shotgun sports that happen with ROTC. The other big one is there are college shooting teams as well. I know several of the people that went to my high school actually ended up going on and having a shotgun scholarship to some of the colleges in the area. So that's definitely something that if you're interested in it, you need to check out. That could be an interesting way and a good way to pay for your education. If you're planning on going to college. The next one, give a list of sources that you could contact for information on firearms and their use, and that's 1I. Probably your best place is going to be local gun stores, reputable gun stores. We always make that note. There are some gun stores out there that are not so reputable, so make sure that you're going to a reputable source. But gun stores are a great way to find out information about firearms and how to use them. Rod and gun clubs, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Gun clubs would be another good source of information for firearms because most of them are going to have some kind of an enthusiast in just about any type of gun that you want to shoot. So that's one option for sure. As far as if you're looking for laws and that such, police officers or game wardens would be good sources for laws. Although a lot of times, unless they're just happen to know stuff about the type of firearm you have, they may not be such a great source for the use of a firearm. Because some firearms, let's face it, are more eccentric, I guess, more crazy, more out there. And if you have one of those guns, unless you know somebody that deals with that type of gun specifically, they may be able to tell you the laws on that, but they won't necessarily know how to use it. So keep that in mind. And that pretty much takes us through all of requirement 1 that we're going to be able to do. Again, there were that one segment that we couldn't do because of the gun laws and hunting laws being different from one area to the next. So that ended up being a little longer than I thought it would, with the gun safety and some of the basic background information. So I'm going to end this session here, and when we pick back up next time, I'll talk about the different parts of a gun, the different types of guns, different action types, things like that, and what you would have to shoot as far as the qualification requirement to prove your ability with shooting the firearm. I'll talk about that a little bit in the next video, and then I'll do a third video where we talk about cleaning it. So thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a nice day.